Okay, good morning, everyone. On behalf of the National Whistleblower Center and the film Con and Colapinto, we welcome to this knowledge farming session, empowering whistleblowers, strengthening protections in the fight against corruption. It is an honor to me to be with you here at the Global Anti-Corruption Integrity Forum 2025, and especially meaningful to have this conversation within the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, an institution that has long been a global standard setter in anti-corruption, most notably through the OECD anti-corruption bribery. Today's session could not be more timely. Around the world, whistleblowers play a critical role in exposing corruption, from foreign bribery and money laundering to privacy violations and tax fraud. They are often the first and sometimes the only line of defense against complex cross-border schemes. And yet, in many jurisdictions, whistleblowers still face retaliation, legal uncertainty, and institutional indifference. As legal protections lag or falter, the very people who help enforce integrity are left vulnerable. Over the past 2 decades, however, we've also seen the emergence of a growing body of transnational anti-bribery legislation. Countries across Europe, Latin America, Africa, and Asia have taken steps to align their domestic laws with international instruments such as the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and models like the US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the FCPA. These frameworks aim to close loopholes, criminalize foreign bribery, and promote corporate accountability beyond borders. Crucially, many of these laws are beginning to include or strengthen whistleblowers' protection provisions, recognizing that without safe channels for disclosure, enforcement remains weak. In the United States, we've seen the FCPA, unfortunately, once the world's most powerful anti-bribery tool, face enforcement slowdowns and political headwinds. This has created a space and indeed a responsibility for other countries to step up. Just days ago, the United Kingdom, France, and Switzerland announced a new anti-corruption alliance, 3 countries with robust anti-bribery laws, with a new task force that promise to enhance cooperation, enabling joint investigations and the exchange of expertise. This session will explore the legal and institutional frameworks needed to protect and empower whistleblowers as central actors in the fight against corruption. It will ask how we can collaborate across borders, sectors, and systems to ensure that those who speak truth to power are not silenced but supported. We are fortunate to be joined by an exceptional panel. Let me briefly present them in order of appearance. The first one is Eric Holton. Eric is former deputy of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division with deep expertise in financial crime and international enforcement. Good morning, Eric. Christopher Wiley, whose revelations about Cambridge Analytica fundamentally reshaped how the world sees data, democracy, and corporate accountability. Iman Husseino, journalist, human rights defender, and whistleblower advocate, whose personal story reminds us what's at stake. Elisa Lockhart, attorney and research fellow at the Rusi Center for Financial and Security, bringing sharp legal insight and policy research. And Stephen Cohn, partner and at Conan Colapinto, and chairman of the National Whistleblower Center, a tireless advocate and legal pioneer in whistleblower protections. And myself, Maria de Los Angeles Estrada, advisor of the National Whistleblower Center, anti-corruption professor in Mexico, and I am part also of Mexico's national expert group on whistleblowers protection. Today's conversation is also grounded in the growing body of legal tools and resources designed to support and protect whistleblowers and those who legislate on their behalf. On such contribution, I want to show you this. It's the rules for whistleblowers, a handbook for doing what's right, authored by Stephen Cohn. Here, this updated and expanded guide not only empowers individuals to understand their rights, to avoid legal traps, and to pursue justice, it also serves as a practical roadmap for legislators to draft FCPA's style laws that are both comprehensive and enforceable. In a moment where countries have to rethink their whistleblower frameworks, such resources are more relevant than ever. For anyone interested, copies of the book are available at the back of the room. You can also find it on sale online at the usual suspect sites. And if you would like to support ongoing efforts on this field, donations are warmly welcome at www.whistleblowers.org. Now, before we begin, let me share a few quick notes on how this session will run. So the panelists will speak at the same order in which I introduced them. Each speaker will have up to 5 minutes to share their openings. In the interest of respecting everyone's time and ensuring we hear from all perspectives, I'll be keeping a close eye on the clock, so please forgive me in advance if I have to gently interrupt anyone. So once all speakers, myself included, have had a chance to present their remarks, we'll open the floor for questions and answers. To keep things flowing smoothly, we'll be collecting written questions only. And Melissa here, she's going to help me to bring me the questions. So panelists will each have up to 5 minutes to respond also their questions. And yes, I'm sorry, I will continue in my role of timekeeper. So finally, after we close the formal panel discussion, members of the National Whistleblower Center, and along with some of our today's panelists, will be available for further conversation and informal questions in the cafeteria, so we invite you to join us there afterwards. So let's begin. Eric, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Perfect. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Eric Colton here. I wish I was there with you in Paris, but I thank you for the opportunity to be on such an illustrious panel here. As you spoke here, this is such a profound topic here. I mean, the discourse that we're entering is just not theoretical, it's operational. And I think it is truly important because we are at a crossroads time in regards to actually thinking about anti-corruption going forward. I was the chairperson for OECD's task force on tax crimes and other financial crimes about 4.5 years. So, and there truly a synergistic relationship between that task force and the anti-corruption and bribery working group that is being formed here. And OECD actually came out with a bribery and corruption awareness handbook for tax examiners and auditors, and because they tend to be first line of defense on. So it kind of sets up that framework as to what is truly important. Now, you have attorneys, you have others on the panel. I come from 30 years of experience of IRS criminal investigation, so I kind of come from that investigative background. And just really, I cannot speak enough about the importance of having a structured whistleblower program and really to kind of think about how to detect financial crimes, corporate malfeasance, and systematic corruption. And you start thinking about, okay, what are really the benefits that you actually have? And those benefits truly, at least from, I would say from an IRS perspective, have been pretty significant, overall. I mean, not only are we enhancing transparency and accountability in trying to protect global financial integrity, but there's a financial benefit as well for your treasuries as well. The IRS program started about since 2007 and it's collected over $7 billion. And I'll emphasize that some more. $7 billion over that period of time, and it's awarded almost 1.2 billion in rewards to whistleblowers. So I think that is pretty significant. And when you start thinking about that reward and you actually helping reduce economic risk and protecting the integrity of the financial system, it is truly important. And then you think about having and not only protecting whistleblowers, but using them. And I've had a lot of experience over my 20, 30 years in just being able to access otherwise non-conventional or information from that you would normally not get from your conventional investigative techniques. That is truly critical. I mean, most of the times you have a complex financial investigation, whether it's from the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, whether it's from sanctions or other financial crimes. And so that is so key to having a whistleblower to provide you that inside information and being able to have that structured program for your country as well. But it also, and I was deputy chief for Irish Criminal Investigation, always thinking about, resources. Having whistleblowers also accelerates that investigation as well, because now instead of looking at fragmented evidence and different things of that nature, you're able to now pinpoint exactly where the investigators need to go. Now, one of the critical factors that I think about as we think, when I was with this service, I would always say my tagline was "Now is the time." When at OECD, this is you have a lot of theoretical, conversations and coming up with a framework, but one of the things we always emphasize, and I think with Stephen's book and a paper that I'll reference in a few minutes, we're operationalizing this. We're operationalizing what needs to be done, because where we are right now, as a colleague used before, we're kind of in a regulatory debt. Most, in software or IT, you'll say, well, the lack of software development kind of has that technical debt. But when I think about regulatory debt and making sure that the absence of not being able to push the whistleblower protection, whistleblower frameworks, it is critical. It not only increases the risk, globally for our financial systems, but it increases costs. And so that is a critical piece that I think that we should all kind of think about. Our lack of action costs us significantly. Another part that I will turn individuals to, I think a fantastic paper that was written just recently. The paper is, make sure I get it correctly, a reverse Marshall Plan for anti-corruption. Liberal democracies can fill the void left by the change in the U.S. policy. Now that's a mouthful, but it is something. It is such a accurate statement that I think that is so important. It was written by Stephen Cohn, but I have to give credit also to his chief legal clerk, Melissa Revolta, for hopefully pronouncing that right, Melissa. But it's such a critical step-by-step process in regards to how countries can truly engage and really kind of move forward with this significant issue that we are dealing with right now. As I expressed, this is a crossroads issue in regards to just thinking about corruption worldwide, and it's about truly ensuring global financial integrity. So I'll stop there. So thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Before we go with our next panelist, I want to clarify something. So the people at the Zoom, you can access to the questions and answer space over there. And then if you are here present, don't worry, we're gonna give you the microphone for your question. So thank you for that. Next one, our next panelist, Iman. So do you want to stay there, Iman, or do you want to come here?
It's up to you.
No, no, it's what you want.
I think it can be.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
Thank you for inviting us for such an important event. I'm a member of exile-based journalists, whistleblowers, and human rights defenders. Last 10 years I'm already living and operating in exile in Switzerland, but I'm still working on issues with corruption, exposing lack of the good governance in one of the most corrupt countries and oil-rich Azerbaijan. When government didn't change for the last 32 years, and political power transferring from father to son and now to preparing transfer to another family members. Being a whistleblower in a country like US or Switzerland or in any EU countries like especially like France or UK, it's one thing. But being a whistleblower in a totalitarian country like Azerbaijan, it's far more dangerous. In countries like US, whistleblowers receive rewards for their disclosures, as provided by American law. In Azerbaijan, however, dozens of major workers, including whistleblowers, have been imprisoned for their work, for their activities when they exposed multi-billion corruptions. Around 40 journalists, major workers, and whistleblowers have ended up in jail for on fabricated and politically motivated charges just for the last 2 years. Those who cannot be imprisoned are sometimes pursued through translation repressions when they start to call to Interpol and to make a red notice on whistleblowers, such kind of we have recently one whistleblower which is had himself in US, Ilgar Haji, when he reported how big business delivered massive bribes to ruling family members. Our general prosecutor office did not open criminal case on his testimonies, which is provided to all public interest medias. They are opening criminal case against himself. Another critical voices like Evina Iskandar, which is pick up on corruption in the law enforcement agencies, is murdered in his own house in France, just in October 2024. I can share many other dramatic experience even with my own when I spent like more than 1 year to hide myself in the Swiss embassy, like Assange had himself in Ecuadorian embassy in London. But I'm lucky one. I succeed and I escaped. Swiss government managed to bring me out. My brother, which is also one of the most brave anti-corruption journalists, he spent 2 years. During his imprisonment, we lost our mother in a very dramatic condition. And again, this price which is whistleblowers paid in countries like Azerbaijan. And I would like to just say one more thing about importance of this Marshall Plan for like-minded states to using Foreign Corrupt Practice Act in European countries. For example, we can mention recently developed cases in UK when National Crime Agency started to investigate Azerbaijani corrupt officials. It's very good for they start to do this, but unfortunately, they still don't have a clear mechanisms to support whistleblowers, because especially in the tendency when US government and Trump administration cut all of foreign aid to anti-corruption institutions, to human rights institutions like vulnerable groups like us, we're not able to continue our work today. We are totally dependent for foreign aid. And imagine when we lose chance to get support from such a big player like the US government, now we're looking forward to cooperate on the same perspective with UK, Swiss, and France, and other European like-minded states. But unfortunately, some of them don't have a clear mechanisms. And that's what, thanks for you guys for organizing and raising awareness around this serious problem, because if it's continued like this, most of the anti-corruption groups can't survive. We need, it's not only whistleblowers, need the same mechanisms like US-based whistleblowers and international whistleblowers able to use US law. We need as well the same law in EU member states, in OECD member states, in Council of Europe member states, and we're glad to continue such kinds of important discussions in the future. And again, last things, very important things with the National Crime Agency. For example, today they are already finished several cases and collect and implement penalties against kleptocrats in UK. But imagine the half of the money they start to spend for increasing capacity for National Crime Agency staff, which is very good, and the rest of the money which is there not spent and which is still accumulated in UK Treasury, according to our information, we have information sources, our whistleblowers in several UK state agencies told us the UK government think to deliver rest of the money back to Azerbaijan. And this is like we try to use this important event to also say that this is unfair and unlogical. You can't return money and or stolen assets, which is you are collected with your UK like law enforcement agencies, and you can't give this money to the same kleptocrat back to Azerbaijan. When we ask, we are calling to everyone for guys, we can't survive. We need institutional support, and most of the donors, even the UK-based donors, support, we don't have enough money. For example, now it's Europe mostly focused on issues with war in Ukraine, in crisis in the Middle East. We say we don't need specific funds. We need just some part of the funds which is you're collected from our corrupt officials. And again, without comprehensive cooperation, without this new Marshall Plan, I strongly believe we can't able to successfully cooperate as like we civil society institution, investigative journalists institution, whistleblower associations, and lawyers community. We need additional institutional resources, and we're glad for if we able to find together the successful ways to implement our main goals. I thank you and happy to respond to any questions later.
Thank you, Eamon. Thank you. We're going to continue with Christopher. Chris, the floor is yours.
Hello. Can you hear me? Is this, yeah, great. So my name is Christopher Wiley. Most people know me as the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower. Back when I had pink hair, although I'm not my natural pink. Steve asked me to come and speak here at an anti-corruption conference, and I was quite excited to. Normally, when I speak at events, I'm speaking about technology and data and AI. But my own journey to become a whistleblower really did touch on many sort of aspects of corruption around the world, and also I saw sort of firsthand so many instances of institutional failure for oversight where things were being prevented. I started my career in technology and politics really young. I did a secondment. I'm from Canada originally, and I worked for a political party there. And in the 2008 presidential election, I did a secondment down to the Obama campaign, where I worked with a guy by the name of Ken Strasman, who is the director of analytics for the first campaign that really used scaled data to engage people. And it was the Obama campaign that really inspired me to see the potential of data and AI. You know, I worked on a campaign where we were using data to identify people who had never voted before, and you know, often from marginalized communities, figuring out what are the things that we can go and engage them on so that they'll come out and participate. And it was really successful. outside of the United States, transposing some of those techniques into Canada, later the UK. I got recruited several years later by a firm called SCL Group, which is a military contractor working for different NATO defense ministries on counter-extremism. This is sort of at the time when ISIS was becoming an emerging threat, and a lot of security agencies had this sort of question about how people were being radicalized online. You didn't really have departments inside of defense ministries looking at Facebook. And so I got recruited to start to look at that problem. How did people who were normal citizens one day suddenly were going into Syria or North Africa and going and killing people? And one of the things that we realized early on was that Facebook's algorithm was helping find people through its personalization engine, its engagement engine, and doing a lot of the sort of legwork for some of these extremist organizations to recruit people. One of our clients introduced my boss at the time to a guy by the name of Steve Bannon. And this was sort of before Steve Bannon, and he was sort of an unknown figure. And he was looking for a way of, to use the word, engaging American citizens with a project that he had for Breitbart, which is an alt-right news organization. But because we were doing military research, we couldn't actually share anything with clients because it was protected research. So Steve convinced an American billionaire to acquire the company so that they could own the IP itself. And that's how Cambridge Analytica was born. When that happened, the company changed quite a bit. It moved away from a focus on military operations into a focus on political operations. And it was at that moment that I really started to see how data can be used not just as a means of engaging people, but also as a means of undermining democracy and to use a word, corrupting governments. The company ended up working on political campaigns all around the world. It touched every single continent, using data to promote disinformation back in a time when people didn't even know what that was. I left because I knew what was happening was, if not illegal, grossly unethical, and it wasn't what I signed up to do. Immediately after I left, I was slapped with all kinds of legal threats. The company hired private investigators to follow me and harass me. I had to leave the country. I then tried to warn Facebook about what was happening. I went to California. I met with several senior executives, some of whom are now in the C-suite of Meta, about what was happening on the platform. They found it really interesting, not from the perspective of a threat on their system, but as a means of exploiting their algorithm to engage people more. And in fact, they went and hired some of the people who were working on the Cambridge Analytica project to then go work inside of Facebook. It was only until a journalist at The Guardian, Carol Cadwalader, started looking at some of the weird spending habits in the Brexit campaign that somebody actually got in touch with me, Carol, and started asking me about these sort of weird organizations that were receiving some of the largest, not some of the largest expenditures in the Brexit referendum. It was at that point where I said, well, these are actually these subsidiaries, and as part of this larger organization, Cambridge Analytica, and they've set up this entire sort of network that helps them essentially launder money and hide money and do the same with data. The Guardian then convinced me that I should go public with this information, which I did. And it became a very large scandal, not just for Cambridge Analytica, but also for the company Facebook. It implicated the Russian government. I had threats from the Russian embassy. It implicated governments all around the world. I had threats from the BJP in India. I had threats from you name it. And also, Steve Bannon at the time was on the National Security Council in the White House. So I somehow managed to piss off the United States and Russia at the same time. I testified at Congress 5 times. I had to move several times because I got attacked physically on multiple occasions. And I guess, I'm here to offer my sort of personal experience as a whistleblower. I think in regards to the theme of this conference, anti-corruption, the one thing that I would say is that often corruption is framed in terms of money. But one of the things that I really started to understand with the advent of the internet and social media and AI is that there's another dimension to corruption, which is the corrupting influence of data and technology platforms. And that it's not just money that corrupts, it's information and the ecosystem of propaganda that can also allow that corruption to fester. And to look at sort of this issue in a wider context, I think, is helpful. So yeah, it's nice to be here.
Thank you, Eric. Very sharp and just in time. Thank you very much. So we're following with Elisa. Elisa, please. Thank you.
Wow, what a note to follow. Hi everyone, my name is Eliza Lockhart and it's great to be here and see you all in the room, and hello to everyone online. I'm a lawyer and a research fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, and I sit in the Centre for Finance and Security within RUSI, and we look at issues at the intersection of finance and security. And so at the end of last year, I undertook a research project that looked at the proven impact of whistleblower reward programs that target private sector economic crime, and whether such schemes increase the effectiveness of economic crime investigations. And so that research was funded by the SOCASE research program, and the report is available online if anyone wants to read it. There's lots of findings that came out of it. In terms of trying to answer those questions, I looked at evidence from the existing US and Canadian reward programs, in particular the ones run by the Securities Exchange Commission, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and the Ontario Securities Commission. And I also looked at what the debate on this topic was in the UK and Australia, because those two jurisdictions are legally quite similar to the US and Canada, but have had very different cultural attitudes towards rewarding whistleblowers. Although, as perhaps we can discuss, or Steve will mention, these attitudes appear to be changing. So, as I said, lots of findings came out of my research, but I'm just going to try and quickly, in my time, run through the 4 key findings that I found. So the first one I found is that these reward programs achieve particular goals, but not in isolation. So what I mean is that the existing evidence demonstrates that these reward programs have the potential to deliver really valuable outcomes in the fight against economic crime. So they increase the number of whistleblowers coming forward with actionable intelligence about illicit financial activity. And as Eric's mentioned at the top, this increases the number of successful law enforcement actions, prosecutions, and financial recovery. And in addition, in North America, we can see that these programs appear to be creating a deterrent effect, as well as strengthening internal compliance systems. But that not in isolation part means that we need to place these rewards in their context, and that is that they are essentially a regulatory tool. So they're not designed to comprehensively compensate all whistleblowers. We pick and choose which offences these rewards apply to. And that means they're essentially, they should be thought about as incentivizing or creating an intelligence service and paying for that service when it gets results. And therefore, it's really essential that if a country is going to put a reward program in place, that it's part of a broader framework of compensation, protection, and enhanced regulatory powers. My second finding was consult to customize. And that's referring to the fact that when you create one of these programs, there's a menu of design choices that are going to determine how the program functions. And these choices can be thought of as the building blocks for any program. And they enable you to, with quite a high level of control, manage the intended and unintended consequences of introducing a reward into the market. And so what I mean by consult to customize is when you're thinking about introducing a whistleblower reward, you really need the evidence. You need to understand the frameworks that are already existing in your country. You need to conduct studies on the regulatory capacity and the public sentiment, and then you can design your program appropriately for those circumstances. And that consultation process can also include outreach and educative initiatives that are going to be essential before a reward is introduced. And why that outreach piece is so important goes to my third finding, which I labeled prioritize the message, not the messenger. And I think this is probably the key thing to come out of my research. And that is when I was looking at how whistleblower rewards and just how whistleblowers themselves were looked at in countries like the UK and Australia, I found that there were a lot of misconceptions around whistleblowing. And the fundamental one I kept coming across time and time again is the idea that people shouldn't be rewarded for doing the right thing. And I think this narrative originates in no small part from the fact that in a lot of countries like the UK, like Australia, whistleblowing is put into the employment law box. And so in the UK, for instance, you can really only be recognised as a whistleblower if you report against your employer. And what that means is that it frames the entire process of whistleblowing as a kind of breach of these traditional ideas of employee loyalty. And moreover, any employee that has been retaliated against has to go through an employment law tribunal, which essentially interrogates the whistleblower's motivations for reporting, along with their entire professional and personal life. So it entrenches this idea that a whistleblower's value is intrinsically connected to their moral integrity. I'm not saying that whistleblowers are not moral people. The whistleblowers that I interviewed were incredibly courageous and ethical people. But requiring them to meet these, frankly, ridiculous and cruel standards that none of us, I think, would meet is not only impractical, it actually impedes financial crime investigations. Because a crucial choice of the North American reward programs is that they prioritize the value of the information over the motivations for reporting. And this represents, in countries that have been historically against rewarding whistleblowers, this represents a fundamental change in how you view whistleblowing from this kind of altruistic act of a moralistic individual to essentially an intelligence service. And so if policymakers are serious about economic crime, adopting an intelligence-first mindset to whistleblowing is crucial, particularly when we're talking about financial crime, which is covert and is structured to look legitimate. Insiders are sometimes the only way we're going to find this information. But that is going to require a cultural shift in countries like Australia and the UK. My final finding is just that this is an ongoing process. It's not going to be immediately perfect. When you implement a reward program, it's going to need to be monitored, because when any initiative geared towards economic crime, you're going to have those illicit actors are constantly evolving to kind of exploit and create regulatory vulnerabilities. So you can see from the US programs, they're having to constantly monitor their reward programs to see what are the positive impacts, how can we amplify them, what are the negative impacts, how can we mitigate them. For instance, we're seeing a lot of employers trying to gag their employees through their employment law contracts, saying that they're prohibited from reporting. You need a regulator who's monitoring the program and who's well-resourced and empowered to go into the market and find those type of behaviours and actively protect whistleblowers. If you're incentivizing people to come forward, you need to be prepared to protect them. So in summary, I found that there is evidence that demonstrates that these rewards have really impactful results if you structure them correctly, you monitor them well, you consult with the community. And I think, frankly, even countries like the UK and Australia that have historically been very against rewarding whistleblowers, any OECD country, frankly, they're more than up to the challenge of analysing their circumstances and designing an innovative and effective reward program that would give really impactful results for their investigators and prosecutors. And frankly, I think the cultural change around whistleblowing being seen as an intelligence service is already well underway. Thank you.
Eliza, thank you very much. So we'll continue with Stephen.
It doesn't change?
It should, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for caring about these issues. And I want to thank all the panelists who've done a wonderful job. Eliza's research is groundbreaking. Her report is online. I think it's mandatory reading for every single policymaker, every single NGO, every single government official that is serious about anti-corruption. It is the most comprehensive study ever done on how to make whistleblowing effective, and to ignore it is to say, welcome criminals. It is the most important report, period. That's the beginning and the end. So I could end now, but I won't. So I generally speak about whistleblowing, and I don't need to here because the other panelists have filled in all the gaps. I'm here to talk about enforcing the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. We are in a worldwide crisis. Wake up. I do not know what is going on because I'm not at all the sessions, but the United States did about 95% plus of all the worldwide anti-corruption prosecutions, probably more than 95%, funded NGOs for democracy building worldwide, helped create the OECD, helped push all the OECD countries to do their own versions of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. We had a distinguished representative for the Department of Justice approved to be on our panel, but was blocked. They took that away. The FCPA has been frozen in the United States, which means 95% plus of all anti-corruption prosecutions are ending, which means bribery, go ahead. And our current president is pretty much saying that. So either we go home, declare bribery legal, because why should it be illegal if everyone's doing it? Be it out in the open, or we get serious. We get serious. And how do we get serious? It's actually much easier than you think. This is why I'm here. This is why we are going to push this as hard as we can, and we hope to speak to as many people as we can. These are the facts. $24 billion collected from corrupt companies paying bribes, destroying democracies and human rights worldwide, in hundreds of successful prosecutions by the United States in the last 10 years, collecting $24 billion, $2.4 billion approximately a year. Enough to fund all of the AID programs that have now lost their funding. Second, those prosecutions have been assisted by over 66 international non-US law enforcement agencies from 44 countries. In other words, at the grassroots level, the international community has been working with the United States. So France or Italy or Spain may have thought that by not aggressively pursuing foreign corruption prosecutions, they somehow were protecting domestic industry. But they were not, because all of those companies were getting caught. The crimes were transnational. And the only thing these countries were getting out of it was no money, because the United States was grabbing all the sanctions. But those very cases done by the United States could have been pursued by the UK, could have been pursued by Switzerland. And I don't want to go into all the details, but bribery by these foreign companies is a transnational crime. That's how the United States gets the jurisdiction. Other countries can do it. So what we see at the grassroots level is that international law enforcement has been engaged. Next, through the efforts, the past efforts of the United States and OECD, every nation within the OECD has approved an anti-corruption, anti-bribery convention, and they have enacted their own versions of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. That includes every nation in the EU, the UK, Canada, Japan, Australia, in short, every liberal democracy in the world has an FCPA for which they can enhance and activate. This is not a question of passing new laws. This is a question of using the laws that exist, the law enforcement agencies that exist. And then the OECD has given us something else, a gift, an incredible gift. They have audited all of these FCPAs from all the different countries and have made findings as to what works. So we're not here in an academic situation. There is no more time for debate. The corruption will grow. The prosecutions are ending. So we're at a crossroads. But the OECD has done the audits, and they have come up with the practices that work in nitty-gritty detail, beginning with whistleblowing, because they know that the whistleblower is the #1 source of all detection. And then they look at what type of whistleblowing. And it's exactly what Eliza has said. They've looked at the US structure and determined that's the best one. I got a couple charts. See if we ever find one.
You can see it there, Stephen.
Oh, there. So this is just a chart. You can see some of the FCPAs, but I'm going to get to where we're at. How do they know the Dodd-Frank reward structure works? Well, there's the map. As of 2021, over almost 6,000 international whistleblowers, non-US people. Don't talk to me about culture. Don't talk to me about right or wrong. The people of the world being impacted have used our program to revolutionize foreign corrupt prosecutions. The problem is you've had anti-corruption in one country, United States. You knock it out in the United States and you've knocked it out worldwide, unless the rest of the world does their job. All of these countries in black, these whistleblowers could go to the United Kingdom. They could go to France. They could go to any liberal democracy. And I mention that because you need an effective law enforcement. You need the rule of law. You need guarantees of confidentiality, but it doesn't have to be the United States. Any of them could pick this up. In fact, they need to. The OECD also audited the structure of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Acts, from detection to enforcement to the amount of penalties, and concluded in the United States program that disgorgement is at the bottom line, which is when you get caught paying these bribes, you just don't pay a fine or a penalty, you have to disgorge, give back all your profits. That's how the fines and penalties are large. So we know how it works. We know that the OECD countries can all pick it up. And that's why I'm here today to essentially say, if you want foreign corruption enforced, the shift has to be to other liberal democracies. United States is stepping back. It's getting worse every day. But other countries can pick it up. The entire formula is all laid out, and the time is now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're starting with the questions and answers. We have some questions here from the people that is virtually. Chris, can you elaborate on your personal experience with whistleblowing and what it feels to blow the whistle?
Sure. I guess there's a couple things that I could touch on. The first thing that I'd say is that I think when I came out and blew the whistle, it was the sort of end of a 18-month process. I wasn't the only source of information for the Guardian and New York Times. I worked with at least 20, maybe 30 people, each of whom had really important documentation, contracts, banking information that all helped paint a picture of how Cambridge Analytica was unlawfully acquiring huge amounts of data, how it was misusing that data, and also how it implicated public figures and politicians around the world. The reason it took 18 months to get those documents was because every single conversation that I had with another would-be whistleblower or an anonymous source started and ended with, what if I'm going to lose my job? What if I'm blacklisted? I have a family, I have a mortgage, my kids are in school, and what happens if I'm punished for providing this information? Conversations were never about, do I want to or not give you this information? Every single person knew what was happening inside of that company was wrong, that it was illegal, that it was a corrupting force around the world, and everybody wanted to give that information. What was preventing them was really practical concerns about the welfare of their families and their well-being once the scandal is over. And even when I came forward, being the sort of first one to sort of jump off that cliff and go public, I had so many offers of support for like free legal advice, right? Or things that but at the end of the day, I was thinking about, how am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to get a job now that I've just essentially blacklisted myself from the tech industry? And to the point that Eliza was making about this sort of expectation to do the right thing, I think it's a really unfair expectation of that we expect people to destroy their lives to do the right thing. That's substantively unfair. That we don't support them after. There is no, even in the United States where, in certain contexts you can get a whistleblower award, there's no government support program after the fact, right? You can't go, there's no department that you can file I can't work anymore for the rest of my life. What do I do, right? One of the things that I found also was when I went public and there was this giant scandal, I got invited to talk to all kinds of different companies about transparency, about blowing the whistle, Fortune 500 companies. Not a single one wanted to actually work with me though. And I think that's the experience of a lot of whistleblowers that I've spoken to, that we applaud people for doing the right thing, but we don't actually help them. And when we're thinking about how to encourage whistleblowing, which is one of the most effective means of fighting corruption and wrongdoing, we have to think about whistleblowers as people, imperfect people, accept that they're imperfect people, but also how are we actually going to solve the really practical issues that they're facing so that they don't have to make this consideration about, should I do the right thing, or do I keep quiet so that my family's okay? And a lot of the points that you were making, I think are really valid from the perspective of having gone through the process, that I wish that there was more support for people after they've chosen to essentially blow up their lives to do the right thing.
Thank you, Chris. I have a question also for Eliza. So, Eliza, you mentioned in your comments that UK attitudes toward whistleblower reward appear to be changing. Can you expand on that? What is happening?
Yeah, I think that people like Christopher telling their stories has really started to shift the narrative around whistleblowing. And particularly in the UK, there have been a few quite large financial scandals. There's been the Post Office Horizon IT scandal, which was brought to light by whistleblowers. We're currently investigating the IP line for contracting during the COVID pandemic. And frankly, I think people are not only getting fed up with seeing waste and corruption, but are also really starting to appreciate exactly the financial, personal, professional, medical consequences of whistleblowing, and seeing people in their community that they know and they trust being destroyed by the consequences of trying to do the right thing. And so I think there is a cultural shift underway around whistleblowing, and there is an appreciation that whistleblowers need not only protection, but a financial layer to that protection, because they will have professional and financial consequences. I also think there's an institutional shift. I think law enforcement in the UK are fed up with being hampered in their investigations. The director of the Serious Fraud Office, Nick F. Grave, which is the UK government's financial crime investigative and prosecutorial agency, spoke at the launch of my paper, and there's a video of that online, where he talks about the fact that they're dealing with financial crime investigations involving, I see he had one on foot that had 48 million documents. The largest they've had is 70 million documents. And without a whistleblower, he described them as scrabbling around in the dark. And it's just the scale now of these investigations is so huge that without an insider essentially turning on the light and saying, this is where you need to look, it's impossible for law enforcement to do these investigations efficiently and quickly. And we're seeing in the UK that other agencies, such as the Financial Conduct Authority, have said that they're reconsidering their position. And about 2 weeks ago, the UK Treasury announced that it was relaunching its reward program in the style of a US or Canadian reward program. And so I think we're seeing a definite shift in the mood towards supporting and seeing whistleblowers as a source of intelligence. And also it was announced on Friday, actually, that the UK has joined an international anti-corruption prosecutorial task force with Swiss and French prosecutors that is signalling a major shift in international leadership on anti-corruption enforcement. So really, there are countries, OECD countries, willing to step into the breach that the US has made in stepping back from FCPA enforcements. And I think that's actually really exciting to see, and hopefully more to come.
Thank you, Eliza. I have a question also for you, Iman. In your view, how can international institutions and civil society better support journalists and whistleblowers working under authoritarian regimes, especially when state systems are used to silence dissident and cover up corruption?
So you mean international institutions like OECD, I think they need to provide more capacity building support projects to civil society institutions, and especially in current situation when most of the actors of the civil society in countries like Azerbaijan or another oil-rich country like Russia, half of the people supposed to be in jail, another half, like which is not jail, still living in big prison, like what is Azerbaijan or Russia is. They're implementing serious self-censorship and not able to speak up. They need to think how to support civil society institutions who are able to leave the country and start to operate in exile. This is because it's exile-based institutions. It's being like a whistleblower defender, Azerbaijan whistleblower defender in Switzerland. It's cost expensive activities. Like you need to survive first of all for yourself, and it's kind of difficult to go and engage with the stakeholders, with the donors, to explain them, look, I'm a human rights defender, I'm trying to save whistleblowers in Azerbaijan and say, look, we can support you if you want to save like whistleblowers, let's say in Switzerland, because several NGOs like successfully operated in Switzerland. But Swiss government or Swiss development agencies never supported my activities or anti-corruption activities in Azerbaijan because they said, well, it's kind of super risky, we still have some kind of business relations in these countries, and that's why only way to survive is kind of provide more information for stakeholders like philanthropic organizations who are still interested to take action in country like ours. Again, very important also to have additional mechanisms. For example, we have very big hope, which is already missed a few weeks ago, because all of you might probably remember corporate sustainable development, corporate responsibilities and due diligence directive, which is EU adopted. And we're planning for, as a civil society institution, we're able to use these mechanisms in several years and to engage with the business community. Say, look, if you're doing business in a country like Azerbaijan, make better due diligence. But right after when Trump administration de facto stopped and the euro stopped foreign corrupt practices, EU, this negative trends started here in Europe. European Commission prepared new packages, like omnibus packages, and due diligence directive right now under serious risk because amendments which is European Commission proposed kill all perspective for us as like a civil society institution and also for other stakeholders. That's why we should not only think about Azerbaijan, we should also need to think how situation what's happened in US, for example, when some US officials saying for US did doing wrong stuff, they are corrupt by their own. Imagine what Azerbaijani president do. He's made public statement recently, a week ago, and said, yes, we would like to help US law enforcement agencies punish some USA corrupt officials who's operated in Baku, and already several USA affiliated people in Azerbaijan. They punished by the law enforcement agencies. They are under house arrest. They're not arrested them as like poor Azerbaijani journalists or whistleblowers, but they are already put them under trouble. And in this kind of situation, when imagine how they need to help us. For first questions, how you can able to save your former employees, like in country like in Azerbaijan, when radio liberty staffs arrested because these journalists expose corruption, when USAID employees arrested because they provided grants for anti-corruption for local journalist communities, And it's very difficult questions. Yes, we should think about how we can find solutions, but I think until private philanthropic organizations don't understand importance of the civil society and importance of our work and don't change their roadmaps, we can't find another opportunity because the state donors in EU, they're also like a dinosaurs. They're not able to effectively operate, and our last opportunity is to try to exchange with best practices. If anyone in the room have some kind of suggestions, we'd like to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have another question, and the next one is yours. With the US passing FCPA enforcement and most global South countries lacking strong whistleblower protections, how can we ensure corruption is still detected and prosecuted effectively, especially when whistleblowers face real risk for speaking out? I mean, I'm from the global South, and if you allow me, I can answer this question. This is a crucial question because the success of anti-corruption enforcement depends on detection, and detection depends on trust. So when the US passes FCPA enforcement, we lose not just a prosecutorial engine, but also a system that has actively incentivized whistleblowers around the world to come forward. So to fill the gap, countries like Mexico or Brazil and other countries must urgently legislate whistleblowers frameworks that do three specific things, I think. First, to guarantee anonymity and protection for retaliation. That's the first one. The second one is to provide clear financial incentives for disclosures that lead to sanctions. And the third one is to separate whistleblowing from employment litigation, right? So it's seen as a contribution to justice, not as a workplace dispute. So in short, I think that we must treat whistleblowers as intelligence assets in the fight against corruption. If we can create systems that are safe and credible and rewarding for those with inside knowledge, we don't just compensate for the FCPA pause, but we build a stronger and more regionally owned anti-corruption regime. And this is not possible. This is not just possible. I mean, it is necessary, especially right now. So we can continue with your questions, sir.
Do you have a microphone? Or?
Yeah, let me bring you a microphone. Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm known to some of the panel, but for the rest of the room, my name is Ian Foxley. I'm the CEO of Parhesia, and I'm the whistleblower behind the Airbus scandal. And therefore, Christopher, I can empathise totally with your experience of the damage to home, health, work and wealth as a personal experience. It happens to 95% of us. Emmy, I want to answer your question on what else can we do. I want to go back and direct us to the Watergate scandal and what the whistleblowers there said, follow the money, because it touches on everything that the panel has said. If we make it less profitable for the bad guys to do their business, if we disgorge their profits, if we fine them heavily so that it doesn't become profitable or worthwhile to do, then they will stop. Most of them will stop. And hence, the revoking of FCPA is an appalling thing. and we need to find some other form of leadership. And I think it focuses on the OECD to implement the Convention on Anti-Corruption to do that and provide that leadership. Secondly, we want to make it profitable for governments, individual governments, to actually pursue anti-corruption actively. Look at the amount of money the Americans have made through implementing FCPA, and the amount of money that each individual government could take and put to good use if they implemented their own FCPA. And as part of that, the last thing I touch on is the idea of whistleblower rewards and looking after the whistleblower, to put them on a pedestal, not in a prison, to actually not only protect them, because empowerment is about more than just protection, it's about rehabilitation as well. It's about putting the whistleblower back in terms of esteem, self-esteem, and back in employment, reusing all their knowledge and their skills and their experience. Look at the loss of what we lose from good people who cannot work again and ought to be working again and want to work again. And there's I think, a six-part program. One is counselling to repair the person themselves. Secondly, it's guaranteed employment. And thirdly, it's legal aid to actually fight the judicial battle that inevitably happens. Fourthly, it's about vocational rehabilitation to put them back in the workforce. And fifthly, it's about a training and education program to change the culture from the individual level right the way through to the international level. So, Emily, there's my suggestion. And in the UK, we have a thing called the Armed Services Covenant, which is a guaranteed rehabilitation program for servicemen in recognition of the sacrifice they make for their country. I think we need an equivalent in civil society. We need a civil society covenant that recognises the sacrifice that whistleblowers make in acting in good faith to benefit civil society, and take this program and fund it from the fines that are taken from corporates. It's not a question, I know, but it's an idea.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and that's a great suggestions. I just want to throw in a couple things. First, one of the goals of Dodd-Frank and why the OECD has endorsed it is the goal is to protect the whistleblower by keeping them truly anonymous and confidential, which has happened. So if the companies or the governments don't know who you are, they can't get you. So if you look at the overwhelming majority of the major sanctions that have come out under Dodd-Frank, the whistleblowers have suffered no retaliation. But their incentive for coming forward is the award. And I'll say for the record now, my largest case against a massive non-US company that resulted in billions in penalties, the company never even knew there was a whistleblower. So if you can stay under, that's the best. But everything you're saying, once they know who you are, and you are subjected to retaliation, I think Eliza touched upon that point. It is so important to stand behind those sources and make sure they get exactly what you're talking about. And that should be mandatory restitution. The money can come right from sanctions, mandatory restitution for any adverse actions. So I think that goes on. But I also want to say something else, which I think it's, again, coming to your point. If $2.4 billion a year is being generated, not from taxpayer money, but from the sanctions that the corrupt officials, the corrupt companies are being gotten for, as you said, the disgorgement mostly, that all of that money can be turned to beneficial uses, all of it. Not just to benefit the whistleblower, but to then fund NGOs, etc. It's more money than what Trump has cut off from AID. And the final point is to the point where OECD can fill in these blanks. They have the laws, they have the audits, they have the structures. They need the political will. That's it. That's where we come in. But if they do, the actual transnational jurisdiction to fight bribery will double overnight. The United States was doing a very good job, but it only could get jurisdiction over certain countries through certain legal mechanisms. Once additional countries join in, the scope of the jurisdiction will radically increase. Furthermore, our study has shown that 71% of all sanctions the United States has issued since 2014 have been against companies headquartered outside the United States. The reason for that is because of political pressure in the United States to cut the brake to the US companies, who could lobby to get less fines, less enforcement. That ends. The UK can go after US companies more aggressively because they don't have the political pressure. So once the US companies are held as accountable as the foreign companies have been held, the amount of sanctions will skyrocket. My prediction is if 4 or 5 large democracies jumped in on this, they could be generating 4 to 5 billion a year, deterring wrongdoing, and having a massive positive impact. That's why I'm very passionate about this, because we're really at this crossroads. Either we're going to go in a good direction, make things better, and it's not that hard to do, or it's a total collapse of the anti-bribery prosecutorial regime from the last 20 years. Total collapse or progress. And that's it.
Thank you. I have a question for, just give me 1 minute. I have a question for Eric here. Eric, how did the IRS realize the reward system works, and how can moving forward countries apply similar policies?
So, a great question. And before I even get to that question, I love the passion that is on this panel. I mean, I think the passion that is here, really represents that, as Steve mentions, the crossroads that we're up against. And but I say from this, let's turn this passion into true action. Let's turn this passion into we having this great conversation. Where do we go from here? What are the next steps? Where do we move from here? But to your question in regards to the IRS and the implementation of this program and how it used the program to incentivize whistleblowers. Now, one of the key factors that we use, and I come from the criminal investigation side of the house, so we would publicize that as much as possible, so that as many people as possible will see that, hey, whistleblowers potentially, maybe come forward, or a case derived from a whistleblower. To Steve's point as well, the IRS kept the fact that, confidentiality is critical. Confidentiality is critical as far as going forward. But it is also the importance of what the IRS is trying to use is using data to be able to grab that information so that they can have an effective investigation. I think we're here again, kind of thinking about where we are, and I know consistently the OECD uses this whole of government approach and how that is essentially critical. So you take on, gentlemen spoke about Cambridge Analytica. All right, the critical factor of where we are, data is just like gold right now. I mean, in being able to, the IRS using that data to assist with investigations, that is extremely critical. Then, as you think about over the last few years, really thinking about a lot of the global leaks, you got the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, or the Bahamian Papers. I mean, there's so many different papers that have come out that have provided so much information, and being able to use that to kind of move forward and it has stronger prosecutions globally. When I used to be in charge of international with the service, and I was in Singapore, and I saw a statement as I was walking. It says, "I can move your money around the world in seconds." That's what we're up against. And that's why whistleblowers are so important. Because here, as an investigator, you're like, well, you're trying to find and trace that evidence. But in this global economy that we're in, moving your money around the world in seconds is hard to find. It is hard to trace. And that's why whistleblowers are truly important. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Eric. I have here another question. Yes, go ahead.
My question is for Stefan Cole and Maria Estrada. What kind of personal quality do you think helps a whistleblower the most is to speak up? And on the other hand, for those who choose not to speak out, what do you think holds them back?
Sure. Well, thank you for that. It's a great question. The holding back is fairly easy, and Christopher touched upon that. People are generally afraid. Why would you speak out and risk your entire career and your family? And this is what is important to understand. If a company is honest, they'll shake your hand. There'll be no retaliation. Oh, thank you. But if a company is dishonest, you could be costing them hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. The people who've been lying and cheating might go to jail. So their reaction against you will be vicious. Because if they don't destroy you, your information may destroy them. So a naive employee thinking they're doing the right thing, if they turn that information over to an organization that is corrupt, it is going to have a disastrous impact on that individual. And that's why people don't speak up. They either understand that their management is profiting and going along with the wrongdoing, so do not speak up. Now, what makes a good whistleblower? And you're gonna, this is not gonna be I think the answer you're gonna want, but it's the answer I'll give you. A good whistleblower is somebody who learns about their rights before they say a word. I am on my hands and knees, I've been doing this for years, begging the community not to say, speak out, learn, because there's so many ways you can blow the whistle and protect yourself, and there's ways you're going to blow the whistle and really have a very bad ending. And the reason that's so significant is because from a corporate perspective, retaliation is such a good thing. They retaliate against one, they silence 1,000. And it doesn't matter if you win or lose your case 5 years later. They've sent the message. It's the greatest thing they have. We love it. On the other hand, if the whistleblower learns their rights, and there's opportunities to be anonymous and confidential, if there's law enforcement agencies that will protect you, that will treat you as a real source, and that you can actually, as Eliza is saying, use your information as law enforcement intelligence to actually get a positive outcome. So that's what I say. A good whistleblower learns their rights first. A whistleblower or an employee who's going to court disaster just goes ahead and just reports without knowing what their rights are. And that's spoken as a lawyer.
Thank you. I'm going to say the same thing. I mean, you have to know your rights. That's the first thing. Like if you want to be a good whistleblower, and if you want to decrease the risks, you have to know the legislation in your country. And if you don't have any kind of legislation like in Mexico,
you have to learn a lot about transnational legislations because that's another option that we have as whistleblowers. So that would be my insight. I think that someone else had a question here. No? Okay, I have another question, and I think that this is going to be the last one. So it says, what would be the best way to deal with political will in protecting whistleblowers? It doesn't say it's not directed to someone, so if someone in the panel, someone in the panel wants to address that question.
This is probably a typical academic answer, but independent evidence-based research can be incredibly effective. And I say that particularly in the whistleblowing space because it is so contested and it can become incredibly emotional. But actually gathering data, looking at the data can shift the dial. And I'll give you an example to illustrate this. In Australia, just like the UK, whistleblowing has been painted for a very long time by politicians, whistleblowing awards, as being out of step with community values. And the idea of paying a whistleblower has been labelled as something that's not desired or not wanted. When the Human Rights Law Centre actually surveyed Australians, surprise, surprise, they found that Australians, the majority of them, would be in favour of financially supporting whistleblowers who came forward with evidence that actually led to successful prosecutions. And I think, frankly, if you did a similar survey in the UK and other countries that have historically had long-held feelings against rewarding whistleblowers, I think similar changes would be reflected. So actually having accurate, independent data is to present to policymakers is a very effective way of making change.
And I just want to second that. That's why her report is so significant. And also the OECD audits, which I obviously don't have time to get into, is so significant. And to just address that to the next step, in 2022, National Whistleblower Center, my firm, we did a major campaign to get a money laundering award law, mandatory awards for anyone reporting money laundering. And we used the objective data and we used the cases from whistleblowers, so the two together, and it received unanimous support of every Democrat and Republican in the United States Congress. Was signed into law. I don't know if that would happen today in the current political environment, but that using the data and also using the personal stories of how important the whistleblowers' disclosures are and how tragic and terrible it is if those whistleblowers end up on the dole.
Thank you. So I want to sincerely thank all our panelists and participants for this rich and thoughtful conversation. To close, I would like to give the floor again to Stephen just for some final reflections and closing remarks. Stephen?
Thank you. Well, I just want to thank everybody, the panelists, everyone who's listening. And again, I just want to emphasize, I've been to many conferences, I've been to many lectures, I even teach in a law school, and it's a very interesting topic. But I just can't express the frustration I'm bringing to you from someone from the United States who has seen tremendous progress over 30 years. I've been practicing for 40, tremendous progress, laws getting better, and to watch it be cut down in a tragic manner, and knowing how it's going to impact the worldwide anti-corruption community, how it's already impacting because of the funding, but who also can see that there is a very good solution that can be immediately activated. Just one last example on that. We're now looking at all the current Foreign Corrupt Practices Act cases. There's like 20 major cases that were under investigation by the USA. All of them could be picked up by OECD countries right now. So we're at a crossroads. So that's all I can say. Thank
you
you.
very much. 1:01 p.m. So we're closing this panel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And just, we do have complimentary books if anyone wants one, and a little brief PowerPoint outline.
Can I get you guys all to smile?
Oh,
Oh,
these
oh,
pictures.